Hello, everyone. This is Debra, and you are listening to or watching Human Potential at Work. Today, my guest is joining me from England, and she's unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, joining us from a hospital in England because her daughter has been ill for the last 6 weeks. So we definitely want to send her our prayers and love. But Elly Chapple is joining us today, and she really caught my attention on Twitter. She is she uses the hashtag flip the narrative, and she just has a really important voice. And I wanted to make sure that you knew about her work and you knew about her really amazing story. And also, we're going to get to learn more about her amazing daughter, Ella, as well. So welcome to the program, Elly.
Hi, Debra. Thanks very much for having me today.
Yes, and I hope your daughter is feeling better. Is she doing better?
Yes, she has quite literally flipped the narrative in here. So we came in really poorly 6 weeks ago, and the consultant's words last week or the week before was, "I'm not really sure how she's done this." And I was like, that's kind of what she does.
Yes,
She flips the narrative every which way. So I'm breathing out now, but I'm kind of waiting for the next thing. So
I know it's exhausting, and she's not in the hospital for COVID-19, which is a blessing, but unfortunately she does have pneumonia. And you told me she'd been in there 6 weeks, so that's a long time.
Yes, it is.
Yes. So anyway, we definitely are sending you light and prayers, and we're sending, going to surround Ella with light. So, but tell us, first of all, tell us about your work, how this got started, what you're doing. Tell the audience who you are and about your work.
Well, I started probably about 5-6 years ago. My daughter lost her eyesight when she was 7 years old. She's been deaf-blind since birth, but she was only diagnosed when she was, just before her 7th birthday. And we'd known for quite a long time there was something different, that we were missing something. And people were sort of heading towards the suggestion that she was autistic or that she had other issues. And I just had that gut feeling that you have as a mum. And I knew it was something we'd completely missed. And I happened to have a random conversation with a gentleman called Mark Gray, who's on Twitter, and he changed the course of our life in one conversation. He said to me, "Has nobody ever told you that your daughter's deaf-blind?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, she's got a vision loss, she's got a hearing loss, and the combination of those two deficits means that she's deaf-blind. And you don't need to be totally deaf, you don't need to be totally blind. You can have a deficit of any description in either. But it will mean that she needs a very specific education pathway. You're going to need to understand the term intervener and what those people do. You're going to need to learn a different type of communication system." And this I was sort of, wow, okay. And Ella at this point was building hugely with stress, and it got to the point where she was so misunderstood that I think behavior was the first thing everybody saw, and human being was very much second. And unfortunately, my daughter self-harmed daily, and she hit her head repeatedly. And that ended in tragedy with her detaching both retinas, and she went blind at the age of 7. So at that point, despite everything else she'd actually journeyed through as a young child with lots of different needs, this changed things quite a lot, because the lights had gone out for a start. And I think I've never felt so gutted, because her eyes were one thing we'd really worked hard to protect. And they were the most perfect thing in her body, and the consultants were always so thrilled with the health of the eye. And then suddenly it was just gone, and it was devastating. And so what I said to my husband was, we just need to go home, we need to sort out what we're going to do. He decided he would stick with his job. I had to give my business up. I've always run my own businesses, and I came home and started to focus on Ella. And Ella became everything, and I've done it day in, day out, 40+ hour weeks for 5 years, because I'm now so driven because of what I've seen happen to her, because of the commitment of the people around her, the belief in her. And I noticed probably 2 years in, I talk about this in my TEDx that I did last year at Norwich. And my TEDx talk really sort of gives you the whole story in about 11 minutes, which was quite a hard thing to do. But what it taught us was, I think I went through stages of grief. I went through stages of anger, grief, compassion, forgiveness. And I came out in a space where I sort of said to myself, what are you doing, Elly? Ella's living, she's moving, she's going forwards. And you know what? She's had to find a different way to do that. So you need to do the same. And I started walking forwards again. And it literally flipped in a moment, in a day. And it was this moment of flip the narrative where I just had a chat with myself and I just said, come on, she's leading the way here. You need to do the same. And from that point, we started to use the power of positive. We started to think about how much compassion and kindness can be powerfully positive. Rather than getting angry with people, that we would find a way to walk with them within systems that really aren't set up for people like my daughter, for many people. I mean, the lens is very skewed. Society has not got its head around difference. We are getting there slowly, but we know there's a huge amount of work to do. You know that. And so, in a nutshell, that's kind of our journey. What I do, I travel around the UK. I talk about our story. I've worked with the NHS. I've worked with various education providers. I've done some social care things. It's not one space. It's all spaces. It's all the human spaces. And I think, yeah, it's the connections I've made. So within the access chat that we do on a Tuesday, that's been a really positive space to be, because there are people from all around the world involved in the chat, which it takes you out of your little sort of echo chamber and makes you think bigger and more widely, and not be so concentrated on just your space. And that's what we do. So it's a very organic thing. I don't have any plan. I don't have a strategy. It's just kind of happened. And we've had to find a way to work with it. And I feel like it's meant, like this, we were meant to do this, and everything Ella's experience has helped somebody else's life improve, I think. So that's a really good thing.
I agree. And we do have to walk the process of grief, the 7 stages, according to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. But I've walked some of these journeys too. And it's sometimes it's difficult wrapping your head around it, but it always breaks my heart when people underestimate my daughter. And now my husband's walking this really sad, confusing path with dementia. And I see how people are treating him differently. And of course, so does he. And I'm not exactly sure, what is going on in my husband's head. And, I understand that I can't assume that like I used to assume that I knew what was going on in my husband's head, which I probably didn't always. But I think people around us that we love can be great teachers to us. And it sounds like Ella's been a great teacher to you. And it's sad that, because of just the lack of us understanding someone like Ella, that she would get so frustrated. And she's acting out because she's frustrated. She's not being understood. We all act out when we're not understood. So it sounds like she's a great teacher to you and to many others. And she's a very courageous young woman as well, which I think is a beautiful thing. So
Yeah.
And also, I wanted to point out, let you talk about that you also were part of a book, Adverse Childhood Experiences. Do you mind just exploring that a little bit?
Yes, so I do some work with the marvelous Dr. Wendy Thorley and Ruth Whiteside. Ruth works with emotional literacy and coaching and loads of different areas. Wendy is amazing. I have a hard time keeping up with her brain because it's so fast, and she's taught me a lot. So Wendy walks within the fields of trauma, special educational needs and disability, adoption and fostering, pretty much everything and anything Wendy can put her hand to. And she approached me about writing this book about the ACEs movement, because one of her concerns, and mine certainly, well, primarily, and it's being discussed a bit more now in the public forum, was the sort of, are we going to use this as a testing method for deciding whether somebody has trauma in their life and whether or not they're going to develop into X or Y? And I think Wendy and I, and certainly Ruth, felt that was quite a dangerous thing to do, because you know, it was never developed for that reason. It was developed to look at the societal impact on a person's development. It was developed for many reasons, but not to grade people and make decisions about their lives based on traumatic situations or incidents. And one of the other things that I was really passionate about, probably because of Ella's experience, was that within that ACEs questionnaire and study, there is no discussion of systemic trauma or institutional ACEs. So where the ACE has occurred within a setting outside completely of the parent or carer's control. So whether it's a school, it's a hospital, it's a children's home, it's wherever parents don't have control. Because for my daughter, her biggest trauma happened in a school, and I had no control over that. So when you look at the ACEs study, it's primarily looking at the home and the environment of the family. But what we've got a lot is children experiencing situations in societal spaces that aren't set up for them. And so my question was, is that not an ACE? Are we not looking at systemic trauma and adverse experiences that institutions can bring? So if we're going to talk about it, should we not talk about the whole conversation? Because then that's really transparent. We're looking at actually then the whole of society, not just a pocket part. So we wrote this book with that in mind. In particular, my main contribution was to the institutional ACEs chapter, which I talk about Bruce Perry, I talk about Bessel van der Kolk, I talk about lots of authors of trauma, and also just looked in particular at things like restrictive intervention, which is another passion of mine. I do a lot of work around restrictive intervention and disability. So yes, it's a fabulous book because it's not overbearing. It's long enough to actually absorb. And Wendy, like I say, she's managed to condense such a huge topic into a readable space. So we did that. And then we did the Great North ACEs conference here at Newcastle United Football Ground. And that was last year. And I actually did the session on institutional ACEs with Professor Andy McDonnell, who is the owner of Studio 3. So that's a company that works. They like to use the term distress behavior rather than challenging behavior. And it's a team of psychologists and various other people in education, etc. So we presented the concept at that conference just to discuss it more in full and to look at, would people be willing to look at that? Because it's actually quite a hard ask for many people. It's not about finding blame. It's not about saying you've got it right and we've got it wrong, or it's about really looking at the whole picture. And it was really important to me that we did look at the whole picture, because I think as a parent, sometimes I've felt at the mercy of the system, and I'm not sure if that's a space I don't want to feel like that. I would like to think the system would like to help me. But I think sometimes the way it's been set up, it needs to be sort of broken down and reset in a more modern way, in a more human way, so that, you know, we can make sure everybody's included and supported rather than finding themselves in a space that's very stressful. So that's kind of part of what we did with the book. Yeah.
Well, and wanted to, not all of my audience is in the UK. So tell us
Mhm.
what ACEs, what it is, what the program is, because I know a lot of my audience won't, they're not going to be familiar with.
Okay, so it's the adverse childhood experiences, and there's various domains. So it's looking at whether a child's experienced adversity in their younger years. There's a scale that they use to actually look at that, and it can be sexual abuse, neglect. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but there's a huge amount of literature out there on it. If you want to read about it quickly, I would say there's quite a lot from the UK that talks about it. There's a lady called Lisa Cherry that looks at it quite a bit. There's a lady called Suzanne Zeedyk in Scotland, and she's sort of one of the leading proponents for looking at it with regards to children and EYFS. And I think the way she explains it's really useful. But you're looking at what happens within childhood that's an adversity that causes further problems down the line. The idea being that if you experience something as a young child, how does that impact your life going forwards? And how many times you experience those things potentially raises your score. So your ACE score goes up. So if you've experienced, for example, death, abuse, something else and something else, you might have a score of 4 or more, then you're likely to be impacted more heavily than somebody who has less. However, this is the issue, is that it's not to be used as a scale to decide things about people. It's more to be, I think, probably trauma informed or sensitive to what people have been exposed to, and to understand possibly why they may respond in certain ways. I don't know if you know of the work of Dr. Mona Delahook in California. She's written a book called Beyond Behaviors, and it probably links in a way to the ACEs conversation, but what she's trying to say is, and it's kind of a flip the narrative approach, is that, you know, when you're looking at the tip of the iceberg, you're looking at the tip of the iceberg. The 85% is beneath that. And that's where you need to do the work. That's what you need to understand, that this tip that you see, this response, is a response, and we all do it. If we're under stress or we feel threatened, we respond. That's just biological, and every human and every animal is the same. But underneath that, you then start looking at the why. So for my daughter, it was relevant to, I'm not understood, I'm frustrated, I am intelligent, but nobody's learned how to communicate with me. And it was just building and building and building. She'd also had lots of medical intervention. So there was lots of trauma stemming from being overtouched, being manhandled, having intrusive operations. And people say things like, you know, children forget these things, but they don't. I think everybody, you know, Bessel van der Kolk, the body keeps the score. It really does. The body remembers, the body holds the trauma. And I don't think it matters what age you are. It's very individual how that manifests. And going forward, I think it's about always being very mindful. It's taught me of people's actual experiences in life, and you know that they may respond to you in a certain way, and you've got to kind of give yourself a 5-second window of, yeah, but you've no idea where that came from, and let's be human. And that's something Ella's taught me, because there are so many assumptions made about my daughter on a daily basis still. The people around who know her really well, we know how to respond to that with kindness, because actually it takes a lot of kindness a lot of the time, and you actually want to say, oh my goodness, it's not that, you know, and it isn't. But you've got to remember that we're constantly educating and teaching people about difference, about, yes, you saw this, but you saw the tip. You've got no idea what's going underneath that. And Mona's got a fabulous way of talking about this. She talks about it with children, young people, teenagers that she's worked with. She's looking at it through a behavioral lens, but it's a human lens, because she's talking about situations that we can all connect with, you know, situations where your children are just, you know, going through, I don't know, after school, mine are really tired. My other 2 children are very tired, and they get very upset, and I know they're hungry, but they can't tell me they're hungry, and they have these huge explosions, and it's like, you're hungry. Yes, I'm hungry. And it's like, okay, we needed to get there earlier. But you know what I mean? So she's really, really useful book, and she's in America. She's a fabulous lady. I've talked to her, and I know she's been doing some travel around, doing some presenting. So yeah.
It sounds interesting. So, how did you take this tragedy and turn it into this huge positive of flip the narrative?
I think I just, like I say, I woke up one day and realized that I was going nowhere. I felt like I was sitting on an exercise bike, not that I ever go on them, but on an exercise bike in the corner of the room. And I was just pedaling like fury and going absolutely nowhere. So I was like, I probably could have gone up Everest. That's how fast and hard I was pedaling. And I noticed that people were quite happy with me being parked there because actually I wasn't moving. And I thought, I'm burning all this energy. I'm doing all this anger and I am actually achieving zero. And I thought, I need to get off the bike and start walking again. And that's the only way I can really explain it. So I did. I got off and I started walking. And then I started to notice people going, oh my goodness, she's moving. She's moving. Where's she going? What's she doing? And people were sort of like, what's she doing? What's she doing? And I realized I was sort of in a controlled space on the bike, being angry and mad. But now I was walking and I wasn't being angry, and I was being inquisitive and curious and asking lots of questions and compassionate. And people could not get their heads around this. It's like, how have you forgiven? I said, I don't know if I've forgiven yet, but I need to do something. So I started walking and trusting, because Ella was walking, Ella was moving forward, Ella was being in the world, Ella was being gregarious and curious and really enjoying life, and I'm giving it everything I've got. And I had to do the same thing because that's what she taught me to do. And from there, it sort of hope sprang, and creativity and passion. And then my very dear friend Barney Anglis spotted me on Twitter right when we first started and said, I'm really interested in what you've done. Will you come and talk about it at Festable, which is a conference that runs once every 2 years at the National Star College in Cheltenham? And I said, okay. I have no idea what you want me to do. I've never talked publicly about things. And so I did, and it was very organic, and it just came. I can't explain it. I didn't prep. I just, I'd written a few notes and slides, but I just talked. And I think people say that when it's from the heart, it's really important, because you're just talking, you're speaking your truth, and you're being authentic, and there's nothing pre-prepped about it. And people really engaged with it, and people were like, wow, can you tell us more? And I was like, oh, okay, are you all right? Great. And so for the first year, I went around the conference circuit, and I took myself to every conference, and I offered to talk. And by the second year, people were coming to me and saying, will you come to this? Will you come to that? Will you do this? And then I spotted the TEDx, and I thought, I'm going to apply. I'm going to do this. I need to get this on a stage where it's recorded, it's out there, and I want Ella to know that it wasn't for nothing. So I applied, and we got in, and it happened, and it was one of the most frightening things I've ever done, but it was amazing, and it really sort of helped push the whole movement around Flip the Narrative. And so many people were saying, across so many different walks of life, they all felt a connection with it. It was like, turn it round, turn it upside down, shake it up. It's what people, I think, neurodiverse people do exceptionally well anyway. And I think other people were saying, wow, so it's okay to think like that. Oh, it's okay to be like, yeah, okay, right. No, I can be me. I'm going to do it. And I think it was validation. It was support for people. It was kindness. And I think, without really trying, it was just a human expression of something that had been horrific. We'd come out of it, but we'd actually been able to create something hugely powerful and positive. And it gave so many people validation around what they were doing in their own lives, and that it was okay to be who they were, and that they did matter, and they had a space to be, and they rightly so should, and that the world needed to shift, not them, and that the lens needed to flip, not them. And it was more about, the systems and structures around us being aligned with the actual people that we are.
And I think there's so much confusion when it comes to deafblind. And I know that, I don't know if everyone's like me, but I first learned about deafblind when I was a little kid, and I watched the Helen Keller story.
Mm.
And, Helen Keller, I mean, it was a perfect example of somebody that was acting out because, nobody knew how to communicate with her, and it had to be very, very frustrating. But And I also was surprised. I interviewed the CEO of the American Foundation of the Blind in the United States, and Dr. Kirk Adams. And I did not realize it. I know now that the American Foundation of the Blind also supports people that are deaf-blind.
Yeah.
And so I was saying, why I just did not know that the blind organizations were supporting the deaf blind. I
Yeah.
really hadn't thought about it.
Yeah.
So there's confusion because then you have the deaf organizations and of course the hearing loss and things like that. And so, what do you wish that people understood about, especially as you mentioned, the term can be used deaf blind for somebody that has, hearing loss, but they're not 100% deaf,
Yeah.
and someone with vision loss. So there is still so much misinformation about the community, and also one of the least served. We have terrible numbers in the community of people with disabilities, but you put deaf blind in it, it really starts going. The numbers are so much worse.
Yeah. So there's a lot of good work going on in America for deafblind, and I look there quite a lot because in England we're further behind. We've got a fabulous couple of charities. There's Sense, who support people who are deafblind, and then there's Hutchinson Deafblind, which is a slightly smaller. The NDCS for the deaf are fabulous as well. It is a very small space, but Molly Watt, and Molly Watt obviously is deafblind, and there's
She's
people
amazing.
like Haven Goma, and she's deafblind, who's the
Yes.
first graduate from her. So, and there are some exceptional people out there with this disability who have really given me a goal to reach for, to make sure Ella can do everything she needs to do. And Perkins in America is a space that I've used a lot online. And there's Barbara Miles is a lady who you can Google her, but she does some fabulous videos. She's just one of the most fabulous experts on this in this whole thing, and she believes in these children and young people and adults like I've never seen. Everything centers on the relationship. Everything comes down to the very specific way that you can communicate what interveners are. Interveners are the people who will support you. So Helen Keller's intervener was Annie Sullivan, and their relationship is what I see with my daughter and her team. And you can't explain it. It's beyond words, because Barbara Miles had this beautiful part of a video she'd done. She'd come in one day and spoken to a young man, and she just touched him on his shoulder, and he had very limited hearing and no sight. And she sat down in front of him, and he just leant forward and signed to her, what's wrong with you? And it was one touch from her, and he knew. And that's what I see with Ella, is that the way you can communicate when you have such a deprivation of sense is on a different level entirely. And I think you're using all sorts of things. And I use a lot of resources in America. I have a lot of people that I follow, in particular Haven. She's really, because she can express, and I can ask questions and say, what about this? What about that? But Perkins is an amazing space. One of my most favorite people in the world who passed away unfortunately a couple of years ago was Jan van Dijk. So he was just the most phenomenal guy. He did quite a lot with Perkins, so he is on their video list. But his interpretation of how the deaf blind communicate was also centered around something called limbic resonance. So limbic resonance is the sense of connection, which comes from connection of your limbic brains. So we can do this as humans, and it's probably a bit like your gut instinct or the third eye, whatever you want to call it. When you get that feeling and you think, I think I know, and I'm not. You don't need words to know why. And it's this limbic resonance he talked about, because 95% of your communication's gone when you're deafblind. You literally have 5% left, because that 95% comes from your eyes and your ears. So you're using all sorts of things that we probably all could if we had that level of deprivation. And McInnes and Treffry, they were two people who wrote one of the most thought-provoking books around deaf blindness. And I mean, it was the 80s, but it's so relevant today. And they talked about it in terms of deprivation of sense rather than deficit, because they were saying it's like a suppression of what you would have has led to you seeing the world in an entirely different way. And that there are 5 stages of interaction. But if you look at the 5 stages of interaction for deaf blindness, I would challenge anyone to say that that wouldn't work for many people who have disability or difference, because the first stage is kind of reject. Then you go to, you walk towards sort of basically independence. You go through stages of cooperation, of walking alongside one another, etc., etc. And at the top, you end up with the independence, and that comes from the growth of the relationship and the trust that you build. But it was specifically them looking at deaf blindness, and there's Robbie Blaha and there's lots of other people, and I've actually been in touch with 2 universities in America because they've created intervener level degree programs. We haven't done something like that yet here, but I strongly believe we should, because interveners are trained from like a top to toe. So you're not relying on speech, you're not relying on, you're actually micromanaging every tiny amount of communication. And that would actually help lots of children. It's not just deaf blindness, but because of the severity of the deprivation of loss of sense, you really have to get very creative about how you communicate and how you educate and how you be in the, and that's what we've kind of done for 5 years as well.
And it is interesting because even the example you were giving where the woman touched the man's shoulder and he knew something was going on with her. And
Yeah.
I think we perceive things so much more than we realize. I know that some people call it intuitives, and then people will think you're talking about something else. But I think there's so many ways that we really do express ourselves. And, it's something that, we're still, I believe, trying to figure out what it means to truly be human, which is what we talk about on the show. But during this COVID-19 crisis, unfortunately, we are seeing once again, we've all been working and working and working, trying to help people understand that there is value in inclusion for all, diversity of everyone, the intersectionality of diversity, all of those different things. But it's also chilling to watch as the COVID-19 crisis unfolds. Once again, people with disabilities and people that are over a certain age are just being, discriminated against. And, and we're finding really, really scary old laws on our books that say, well, if you are someone like my daughter with Down syndrome, that, why bother to give her a ventilator? Because, let's give it to somebody that deserves it, and just ridiculousness like that. And by the way, the law doesn't say like that. That's the way I read it in my mind when I read the law, because I thought, how dare you assume that my daughter's life doesn't add value, and that, oh, well, we've got to prioritize, Debra. So let's prioritize this instead of someone like my daughter. And I think that is missing the point of what it means to be truly human, because yes, right now we use our eyes and we hear, and it's a big part of our senses, but there's so much more to who we are and how we communicate with each other. And I now that we're all wearing masks, or should be wearing masks outside in public, because the masks appropriately cover so much of our face, you're missing a lot of things by not being able to see, if you can see, the expressions on my face. If you're someone like my friend KR that reads lips, obviously you just took away, her ability to communicate with you in that traditional way that she would use. So what do you wish that people knew about diversity, especially at a time when we're seeing, once again, all the things that we were afraid of, that we were trying so hard to fix and overcome? And, once again, it seems like, and I know we're not, but back at square one. And of course, after we all survive the COVID-19 crisis, it's going to be a really, really, really long rebuilding. We're not going to go back to the old normal. Thank goodness. We're going to go to whatever the new normal is. But this is, what is your wish for people to understand about Ella, you know, as we try to move to a new way of doing things in the world?
I think that probably I would just like everybody to just give each other a bit of a break. I think that that's the thing about where we are right now. I just wrote a blog about this last night. So for me, this is the gray space. So we're in the gray space right now. And I've lived in that gray space. You probably have too, for a very long time. And this is the gray space every human is now having to come into. And the gray space to me is that it's a very rocky road. We have no certainties. We got the rule book, just got thrown out. It won't fit, it doesn't fit, and it won't work. And by the way, there is no fallback plan. And I've learned how to live like that for a very long time. So I think, in all honesty, we are very well placed to support people right now because we have walked this in a different way for a very long time. And we know how to survive. We've had to write those plans. We've had to cope with those curveballs. I did not expect to sit in hospital during coronavirus with a very poorly daughter who had pneumonia. That was a curveball I did not see coming. And that was, after 10 years of good health. So it really sort of, again, I'm running faster than I can keep up, but I am really well trained for this. And you're really well trained. And our friends are really well trained. But rather than us, because we wouldn't ever see that as something to gloat about, because it isn't, we would say, how can we help? Because that's the other thing that we've learnt in this grey space, which is we have to help each other. My daughter would help anybody because she never holds a grudge. She's totally authentic. She doesn't demand anything from anyone she's with other than just be who you are. And, it's really hard for us to be like that. It's really hard to stay in the present. And it's okay to be in this grey space. And you know what else? There is no such thing as right and wrong. There is no black or white extreme. There is no left and right here. It's all in the middle. And the middle is the most uncomfortable space you could ever sit in your life. But you know what? It's where you learn the most. This is where we learn about each other. We learn about how we live together. We get to throw out some of the rubbish that doesn't work. We get to say, do you know what? We need to stop discriminating. We get to say, actually, our vulnerable elderly really matter to us. And we get to say, everybody deserves to have value and be given a chance, because there is no first, second, and third prize in this race, because it's coming, into our world, and it hasn't picked out anyone in particular. It's going through us. And so it is total uncertainty, and it's terrifying, and I get that. But it's also a chance for us to really actually look at what we were doing and think about, what do we want to hold on to and what do we want to let go of? And I think Ella taught me that very early on, when I was devastated about her losing her sight. And I think for her, it was kind of, it's gone now, Mum, but maybe I don't need it. Maybe I can do it differently, because she has. And I held on so tight. And that's what I think we're looking at now is COVID-19. So
that was so beautiful. That was so beautiful. My producer Doug is in the background and he's typing in. That's such good points. This is why I love your voice. You have a beautiful, beautiful voice, and I want to make sure that the guests know how to, how to follow Flip the Narrative. How can they follow you? How can they get more engaged in this?
Well, you can find me on Twitter. It's just Elly_Chapple, or you can type the hashtag Flip the Narrative, and I usually come up somewhere in there. It's just something to use if you want to actually say, no, stop. I want to turn this around. I want to turn it upside down. I want to believe in humanity, and I want this to be different. It is possible. It's totally possible. This is just about the power of human will. And that's what we need in spades right now.
I agree. And you're on Twitter. Are you on any of the other social media mediums?
I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn.
I was thinking you were on LinkedIn too.
I am on Instagram. I don't know how to use that terribly well. Uh,
I get lots of support too.
yeah,
Well, I don't want to take you away from Ella. I know that you're in the hospital, but I think
yeah,
you have a beautiful, wise voice. I think you probably earned that through the hard walks. I know you were blessed by your daughter, as I'm blessed
yeah,
by my daughter. I agree with you. We need to be kinder to each other. And we, life is really, really, really hard sometimes. But also, I
mhm,
remember when I was sitting in the hospital with my daughter and so terrified, and it was so long, and
yeah,
all the healthcare workers that were surrounding us, just loving us and giving us so much of themselves. And of course, they're doing that right now too for so many others. And it's a scary time. I had a friend of mine tell me yesterday that her mother did not die from the COVID virus. She was in a nursing home, but she died yesterday because she couldn't talk to anybody. She couldn't see anybody. And it's going on. We're going on 6 weeks, and she just passed away because I think she just gave up hope. So
yeah,
these are really scary, troubling, beautiful, amazing times because we can learn so much about what it truly means to be human. So
yeah,
good luck, Ellie, and good luck with Ella. And flip the narrative. Please join the flip the narrative. Use the hashtag. Learn more about Ellie and Ella's amazing, beautiful work. And let's all be kind to each other. So
yeah.
we're thinking of you. We're praying
Thank
for
you.
you. We're sending both of you light. And I look forward to having other conversations with you in the future. So thank you so much, Ellie.
Thank you,
Everyone, stay
Deborah.